Wednesday was supposed to be a tune-up game and a chance to work on Gonzaga's small ball lineup. Instead, it became the worst loss of Mark Few's coaching career.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, folks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, certainly not going to be the most fun show we have ever had here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Gonzaga goes into the Chiles Center at the University of Portland for the final time and leads for just 32 seconds in an absolutely brutal, embarrassing, and historic loss to the Portland Pilots. We're going to break it down. We're going to talk about the good, which will not take very long. We are going to talk about the bad, which will be the majority of the show. We'll talk about the 5 things to watch for that we laid out before the game, including some things that had a significant impact on this game on Wednesday night. And we'll close out the show talking about whether this is truly the worst loss that Mark Few has ever taken in terms of significance and expectations going into the game. And we'll also talk about the NCAA tournament expectations, what this means for Gonzaga at this point. If you're still holding on to hope for a 1 or even a 2 seed, you might want to temper your expectations. Quad 3 losses don't tend to help in that regard. This was Gonzaga's first loss to the University of Portland since 2014. Mark Few, this was the 50th time that he has coached against the University of Portland Pilots, and he was 47-2 prior to this game on Wednesday night, which the Zags lost 87-80. Again, Gonzaga lost in Spokane to the University of Portland back in 2003, and then they lost at the Chiles Center in 2014, team led by Alec Wintering, very, very good UP team, and that was a very down year for Gonzaga. This is not a down year for Gonzaga. They've been stumbling a little bit as of late. We saw the narrow win over San Francisco. Certainly we saw the game back on January 2nd against Seattle U. But here's the thing, Gonzaga hadn't lost a game since November. This is Gonzaga's first loss. They've won every game in December. They've won every game in January. The calendar flipped to February, and suddenly they take a just shocking, unexpected loss. I mean, they just did not look remotely, frankly, interested in playing basketball on Wednesday night. Like, it was a really, I'm struggling with words almost. And for those of you who are regular listeners, not something I struggle with very often, but it was hard to pin down what exactly the problem was. I mean, Gonzaga, they got boat raced right out of the chute in this game. They were down 15-5. I think Few called a timeout before the first media timeout of the game. Mark Few had already called a timeout. They were down 13-5. And then they chipped away a little bit. At that point, they took a lead. Their first lead of the game was at the 6-minute and 55 mark of the first half. Mario Saint-Superi drilled a 3. I think this came just after Venters had drilled a 3. So they had a 1-point lead. 32 seconds later, Portland scored to take the lead. They then went on a 14-7 run to close out the first half with a 6-point lead. Gonzaga never got back in this basketball game until the final 40 seconds when a couple of turnovers by UP, they started to panic a little bit. Gonzaga got it within 5, which frankly, I'm shocked that they got this thing back within 5. They were down 15 for most of the second half, or like 10 to 15 points. Every time they'd get it within 8, they would get it to within 8 or 7 points, somewhere in there. And then UP would get an and one, or UP would get an easy dunk at the rim, or UP would get a 4-point play because Graham Ike high-fived a 3-point shooter for some reason. And then they would be down 12 or down 10 or down 11. And then they'd get it back within 8, and then they would be down 12. And they just could not make up any ground in this basketball game. I told you the good section would be quick. I mean, I guess Davis Vogel was fine in this game. He had 10 points off the bench. In this one, he was 4 of 9 shooting, which isn't great, but like, again, we're grasping at straws here. He had 4 rebounds, 3 assists. I guess I point him out because 3 assists and 0 turnovers is pretty good. Gonzaga's assist to turnover ratio wasn't bad. 19 assists, 9 turnovers. That's pretty good. I mean, they had 9 turnovers. Portland had 17. That's not a stat you typically see in a game you lose and a game you don't lead for 39 minutes of. But it didn't matter in a positive way for Gonzaga. They didn't turn the ball over, but their shot selection, I mean, we'll get to the bad. I guess we can get there now because I don't know. Braden Smith made all 4 of his free throws. Like, that's a good thing that happened in this game. I thought I'll give him a little bit more credit. He was fine in this game. He had 3 steals, 3 of Gonzaga's 8 steals. He hit a mid-range jump shot at the end of the game that brought Gonzaga within 5, I believe it was. He made one of his threes. Like, he was fine in this game. Mario was also fine. His stats aren't great because he threw up a couple of desperation threes at the end of the game, but he was fine in this game. He had 2 assists and 0 turnovers. The 2 point guards combined to have just 1 turnover. That's good. Sure. Let's get to the bad stuff. Everything else. I mean, every other part of this basketball game was bad. There's really no other way to spin this thing. Gonzaga got out-rebounded by a team that ranks 255th in the country in rebounds per game. Frankly, the fact that they only got out-rebounded by 5 is kind of shocking because they were doubled up at halftime. UP had 18 rebounds at halftime. Gonzaga had 9. Perhaps more shocking, and I do not have the time or, frankly, currently energy to look up this stat, but I have to imagine that might have been the longest into a basketball game Gonzaga has ever gone without getting a rebound. Their first rebound in this game was grabbed by Tyon Grant Foster on the defensive end, and it was the 12-minute and 41-second mark of this game. So 7 minutes and 19 seconds of gameplay happened before Gonzaga had a single rebound in this game. UP had 6 at that point. And you might be thinking, wow, 7 minutes of basketball, only 6 total rebounds. Yeah, that's the other thing. UP wasn't missing at all. They just were not missing shots in this game. Gonzaga ended up getting the rebounding margin a little bit closer, actually ended up finishing with 13 offensive rebounds. A lot of that came very end of this game when UP was more focused on defending the perimeter than grabbing rebounds. So like the stats are kind of misleading there. Gonzaga got absolutely munched on the glass in this game. Inexcusably bad. Rebounding is about a lot of things, and certainly not having Braden Huff mattered, but at its core, rebounding is about effort. Gonzaga got out-efforted on the glass in this game by a team that has no business out-rebounding them. Shout out to the Portland Pilots. I don't want to sound like I'm belittling them on this podcast because they played great and they played inspired and they had a game plan and they executed it and they won their basketball game and they deserve all of the credit for all of that. But Gonzaga came into this basketball game, I think, expecting to win and played for most of the first half and most of the until the last few minutes like they were just expecting that they were going to magically come back in the game. And they never did. And it never happened because I don't know if they're all just waiting for each other to pick it up or what the deal was, but the effort was never there from the opening tip until the very end of this basketball game. It just was not there. Gonzaga's shot selection was a disaster in this game. They settled for threes, and they didn't shoot that bad from 3. Again, the stats, 33% is not good, but they were shooting better than that for most of this game. They're 7 of 17 in the first half. I think they were like 3 of their first 6 or 7 in the second half. So at that time, they were like 10 of 24, 10 of 23. Like, they looked pretty good. They missed a bunch down the stretch. A lot of those were desperation threes in the final like 40 seconds. So like the stats a little bit misleading there, but my concern wasn't the three-point shooting. The three-point shooting was fine. They took way too many of them. Way too many threes. I do not know why they were so hell-bent on shooting from the perimeter when they weren't missing Graham in this game. He was there. He was playing. And I think the first 4 possessions they shot threes. They weren't even trying to get Graham the ball. And then when they did, he wasn't turning and squaring. He was like kicking it out. Like they had no offensive identity in this game, and they were just rattling off threes. This is not the team that we have seen Gonzaga be this year. Their offensive identity was poof, gone. The style they played, the game plan was either Gonzaga's players just adamantly refused to execute the game plan for some reason, or the coaching staff had a crappy game plan. I don't know which one of those 2 things is true, or if it's a combination of both of those things, but I will tell you this right now, and I say this very rarely. Mark Few got flat out outcoached. Shante Leggins on one leg. If you didn't see the game, he was in a walking boot and he was literally on one of those scooter things, hopping around, yelling at the referees on one leg, and he ran coaching circles around Mark Few, and that is inexcusable. I do not know why or how that happened, but they got 2 days to figure it out before they play Oregon State, because I don't think Wayne Tinkle is going to outcoach a whole lot of people, but I wouldn't have said that about Shante, and that's what happened on Wednesday night. It does not help when the most versatile and one of the most talented players on this roster, Jalen Warley, just doesn't show up. 3 points on 1 of 2 shooting. He had 1 rebound. This dude had 7 rebounds against the Twin Towers at St. Mary's 3 days ago, and he had 1 rebound in 20 minutes against a team that's not even in the top 250 in terms of rebounds per game. More turnovers than field goal attempts in this game. Just an inexcusably bad performance from Jalen Warley, and you needed him. Emmanuel Innocente undid all the goodwill he had from Saturday's game. He was a non-factor in this game completely. Tyon Grant Foster went 5 of 8 from the free throw line, but missed key ones down the stretch, 2 of 6 from the field. I mean, I could pick anybody on the box score here and tell you they didn't have a good game. Gonzaga shot very poorly from the free throw line. That's not even new. We're just used to that at this point, but it sure didn't help down the stretch when they kept getting fouled and were actually cutting into the lead, except that they kept going 1 of 2 from the line, or 1 of 2, 0 of 2, very rarely going 2 of 2 from the free throw line. It just absolutely killed them. But we're going to talk more about Graham Ike's performance. We're going to talk more about the 3-point shooting, more about the Child Center, all that and more coming up here in just a second.
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. Number 1 ranked UConn dominated Tennessee 96-66, turning a halftime tie into a historic win and avenging last season's loss by delivering the largest margin in the rivalry's history. AZ Fudd had 27 points and Sarah Strong added 26 as the Huskies remain perfect on the season, reminding everyone why they are the reigning national champions. In the Big Ten, number 2 UCLA rolled past number 8 Iowa 88-65, powered by 22 points from Angela Dukelich and a huge advantage in the paint, staking their claim as a national threat. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
All right, folks, segment 2. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network. We are still talking about Gonzaga's historic loss to the University of Portland, snapping a 15-game winning streak, snapping a 20-game win streak over the Pilots, a disastrous game that Gonzaga led for literally just 32 seconds on Wednesday night at the Child Center. We had 5 things we were going to watch for in this game, and I'm saying it that way because when we talk about, if you are a regular listener to the show, you are an everydayer. Shout out to you. Shout out to the folks who introduced themselves to me at the game on Wednesday. By the way, I appreciated that. One of the few bright spots in that day on a Wednesday. But you know that I always do 5 keys to victory when Gonzaga is playing an opponent like, say, Michigan or UCLA or Oregon or St. Mary's. And I do what to watch for when we're not expecting it to be a loss. You can call me a jinx if you want. I was not expecting a loss here. Gonzaga was 21.5-point favorites, according to FanDuel before the game. And so we did what are the things we're going to be looking for in this basketball game? Some of them will be laughably irrelevant as we get to them down the list. But number 1 on this list was, does Graham Ike end up on a minutes restriction? Answer, no. He played 35 minutes on Wednesday. And I have a bone to pick. Braden Huff is out right now. He's out. He's not around the team. He is resting. He is at home. He's going through physical therapy. He's getting right and trying to get back, but he's not with the team and he's not going to be with the team. Certainly not on Saturday. I don't think he will be back next week. Certainly I'd be very unlikely to be back for Tuesday's game against Wazoo. At this point, I wouldn't expect him back for the Santa Clara game. Maybe after that, we'll see. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is they can't just play Graham Ike every minute at center. He's dealing with ankle injury. Like, he re-aggravated that ankle in the Washington State game. That's why he missed those 3 games. Like, Graham didn't look hobbled necessarily. Like, I didn't see ankle pain from him in this game, but I thought we'd see the small ball lineup. And I'll tell you this. So what to watch for, number 1 was, does Graham Ike end up on a minutes restriction? Number 2 was, if Ike sits, do we see more of the small ball lineup? We're going to answer both those things combined, because no, we did not. We did not see that happen. Graham Ike played 35 minutes. Ismaila Dione played the other minutes. There was not, if there was a small ball situation, it might have been for like a minute or 2. It was not a lineup Gonzaga deployed in this game on a regular basis. It was not, they do not seem to have the intention of playing that lineup. And I get why they didn't against St. Mary's. Graham Ike was great in that game. He played really, really well against the Gales. He had 30 points, his second ever 30-point game in a Gonzaga uniform. He played 37 minutes. He threw Gonzaga on his back and willed them to a victory. And Graham was by no means bad in this game. He wasn't the problem. He wasn't the problem for Gonzaga. He played 35 minutes. He has 24 points, led the team by a considerable amount. He was 9 of 16 from the field, which is not bad for him. You take out, he was 1 of 2 from 3. So if you take that out, he's 8 of 14 on 2s. That's good. That's a good percentage for Graham Ike. He had 10 rebounds, another double-double for Graham, one of the country's leaders in double-doubles. 24 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists on efficient shooting. That's a good night. He had a steal. He had a block. He had just 1 turnover. By all accounts, statistically, Graham Ike had a good game. But he wasn't himself. And again, a credit to UP and their defense. I think they had a game plan against him to really kind of not let him get the ball in positions where he could be comfortable. And they weren't doubling him on the catch, but they were doubling him on the dribble. And this is not the first time Gonzaga has seen that. Like, this is a pretty common way that teams defend the Zags. And, I think the lack of a Braden Huff really hurt Gonzaga in this game, because when teams double on the dribble, Graham is usually good at being able to swing that ball either back out to a shooter or get it to the other big, depending on where that double team is coming from. And this is where Jalen Warley's complete non-factor game really hurt Gonzaga, because Graham was either trying to make that pass to Jalen and he was either making bad passes, or Jalen wasn't handling it, or Jalen was going up and getting blocked. Like, there was no impact from the 4 in this game, whether it was Warley, whether it was Tyon. Like, they weren't getting that. And so Graham was kind of on an island and was getting smothered, or was having to catch the ball out at the free throw line 18 feet away. But he was also tentative. He was passing the ball out a lot. It felt like Gonzaga's game plan was to shoot a bunch of threes. And that is an inexplicable game plan when they haven't been good at that all year long, and they haven't needed it. It didn't make any sense why they were. And if you're gonna play an offense where you're not going to utilize your big man, and you're getting gashed in pick and rolls because Graham's not a good defender in space, and Joel Foxwell is just coming off screens and can go wherever he wants. If you're going to run that defense, and you're going to let the guy come off the pick and rolls and isolate your big man in space, and you're not going to really give him a lot of help offensively, run the dang small ball lineup. Why are we not switching to that? We saw what it was not a good lineup offensively. Gonzaga got bogged down. Tyon Grant Foster and Davis Vogel would go into isolation mode a lot of the time because they didn't have a big man who could really make things happen offensively. But that team was lethal defensively. That lineup was so good. I'm going to tell you a secret right now. In a game that Gonzaga lost 87-80, the problem wasn't the offense. You give up 87 points to the Portland Pilots. Your problem was on defense. Portland shot 59% from the field in this game. They shot 44% from 3. They shot 80% from the line. And again, Portland was great. A lot of the times those were tough shots that they were just drilling, but a lot of the time they weren't. That's the problem. The defense was bad, and the defense is good in that small ball lineup. Again, Graham, I don't want to pin all of Gonzaga's defensive woes on Graham in this game. There was plenty of other issues, but that was part of it. And if you had been able and willing to go to a lineup that worked on that end of the floor for 3 consecutive games against teams that are better than this, you might have won this basketball game. But you didn't. You refused to go to that lineup. And then you also refused to really let Graham operate offensively. That is a concern for the rest of the year, because Graham can't play 35 minutes a night. Because if you're going to play Graham 35 minutes a night, he's going to have to take plays off defensively. He cannot be a warrior on the defensive end of the floor and provide for you offensively. You're asking him to do something that he will fail to do, not because he is bad, because he is not Superman. And that's what it felt like they asked Graham to do tonight. And it didn't work. And it felt like there was an option they could have taken that they chose not to. I do not know why they didn't throw out an attempt to run this small ball lineup in this game. And I sincerely hope they take a look at doing that against Oregon State on Saturday or against Wazoo next Tuesday, because if they're unwilling to play that lineup until Braden Huff gets back, I'm worried they're going to run Graham straight into the dang ground. Number 3 on our what to watch for was whether the shooters would get back on track. The 3-point shooting was one of the only things that was like decent in this game. And again, the stats for the 10 of 30 is obviously not good, but it wasn't really an area where the Zags were bad. Steele Venters finished the game 2 of 7, and that kind of sucks because I wanted to have a conversation about Steele Venters having a good night shooting the 3 ball. He was 2 of 4 in the first half, and all 4 of his attempts were good. They were smart shots. They were good looks. He knocked a few of them down, which were big, important shots. The other ones that he missed were good looks. In the second half, I know late in the game, they ran a play that they call Utah. And it's not quite an elevator screen, but it's a play to get Steele Venters a look. Graham's a decoy. He sets a screen. Steele comes off the screen, catches the ball, gets an open look from 3. They executed the play. It worked. And he just didn't knock it down. And it's like, I mean, that dude, that's what you're here to do. Like, you got to knock that shot down, man. Like, it was so frustrating that he couldn't get that to go. And then he missed a couple more late in the game. I mean, they were playing him because they were desperate for threes because they needed to get back into the game. So like his 2 for 7 makes it seem like a worse performance than I think it was. But like when the Zags needed him to hit shots, he wasn't able to do it. And that's killer. I mean, that's killer when that's the role that you fill on this team. Outside of that, I mean, Adam Miller was 1 of 3 the first shot of the second half for Gonzaga, which kind of felt like a little bit of momentum swing in a positive way for the Zags. Mario was the main success on that end, 4 of 8 from 3, 4 of 6 until the final 30 seconds when he threw up 2 hideously ugly shots, just desperation shots to try to get, the Zags back into this game. A nice shooting performance from Mario, but again, not enough from this team, not enough from the perimeter in this game. And Steele, again, it was nice to see him have some confidence in the first half, but when the Zags needed him to knock down some shots, he wasn't able to do so. And that's one of the many things that just killed them in this game. Number 4 in our what to watch for was, how did the crowd look at the Chiles Center? Because this was the last game Gonzaga was going to play at the Chiles Center, and I'm sure they're quite happy about that at this point, to get out of that building and never, ever look back. And because Gonzaga also played in Portland earlier this year for the Oregon game, because they played in Seattle twice, because they're playing in Corvallis on Saturday, we kind of expected maybe it'll be a little bit of a quieter crowd. And in fact, before the game, it was reported that there was 1,500 unsold tickets. So when you run into UP people down the line and they say, "Oh, I was at that game," call them a liar, because there weren't that many people at the game. I will say that the majority of the quote unquote unsold tickets in this game were typically bought by Gonzaga fans, because the UP crowd was there. I was making a joke a second ago, but the UP crowd was there. The student section was there. They were loud. The crowd noise was very heavily in favor of UP. Obviously, there's a heck of a lot more to cheer for on the UP side of things, but like a lot of Pilots fans showed up knowing this is their last chance to play a team like Gonzaga, and they got their first ever win over a top 10 team in program history. So those fans who showed up, who said, "I'm going to make it to this last game against this team," they were rewarded with an incredible historic victory for their school. And Gonzaga just didn't give any of the fans that did show up for their final game there anything to cheer for. And then the final one of our what to watch for, clear proof of how I thought this game was going to go. I said, are we going to see some of those walk-ons? Maybe we'll see Noah. Maybe we'll see Cade. Maybe we'll see Q. I mean, honestly, maybe we should have, because the guys who were on the floor for this game, most of them didn't really seem like they were ready to play or willing and able, interested in playing in this basketball game. So maybe some of those guys would have showed up and given a bit of a different result. Well, folks, we're going to move into the final segment of the show. We're still talking about this game, folks. We're still talking about what went down on Wednesday night at the Chiles Center. Is this the worst loss of the Mark Few era? And what does it mean for the team's NCAA tournament aspirations? We'll get to that and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs, well, that's the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certifications, and location. And if I were hiring, I wouldn't want just somebody who can help me out. I want someone with real experience who can jump right in. And that's what I like about Indeed. You can get specific and target exactly what you're looking for. And with sponsored jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I have been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes by using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves. That's at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Next up, folks, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There is nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moments. But getting tickets, that hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without all the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs with you, the fans. You can pull up the Game Time app, pick an upcoming game, and you can have tickets locked in within minutes. I love seeing the all-in price up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and you can also see the views from your seat, so you know exactly what you're getting when you make your purchase. Great last-minute options, too. The NBA tickets show up at solid prices. Same with Gonzaga's game against Oregon State on Saturday. Tickets kept going down and down and down in price. I got 3 of them for just $32 a piece on Wednesday. So, folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And you can bet we're still talking about Wednesday's disastrous loss for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs, 87-80 at the hands of the Portland Pilots, a game that Gonzaga frankly never looked particularly comfortable in, never really looked competitive in. They got it down within 5 in the final 90 seconds of this game, but for the vast majority of the second half of this game, Gonzaga was never really even chipping away at the lead. Just a listless, frustrating, and seemingly out of nowhere performance. I know that Gonzaga's last 2 wins were by less than 10 points. I know they had that ugly game against Seattle back on January 2nd. And I know that they, struggled in the final minute or so against San Diego, but this came out of nowhere. Like, they led the majority of that game against San Francisco, even though it only ended up a 2-point win. They led most of that game. And in this game, they led for 30 seconds. Like, it was just an all-around catastrophic performance. And I think a very reasonable question to ask is if this is the worst loss in the Mark Few era, because there's not a lot of obvious examples. I mean, I don't want to say caveat, but the part of the conversation is it depends on your definition of worst. Like, obviously, from a margin of victory, clearly, no, it's not that. From a expectation versus reality, that's kind of where we're looking at. And in terms of impact that it makes for the team, I think it's kind of a combination there. Losing an NCAA championship is going to be the worst feeling loss. Both the Baylor loss and the loss, of course, to North Carolina in 2017 and 2021 were worse in the sense that the result of winning that game is complete ecstasy. It's winning the national championship. It's the greatest thing that you can do in college basketball. It's bringing a championship to Gonzaga, and not winning that game feels agonizing because you had that opportunity and you blew it. And so it's hard to compare to that. But, even though the Baylor game, they kind of got smacked around a little bit, you can't call losing to a historically great Baylor team in the championship failure on the same level of getting beat for 39 and a half minutes by a team that ranks over 200 spots lower than you at KenPom. That's horrific. And the North Carolina game was agonizing because Gonzaga had a lead with 6 minutes to go. And again, like there's other games here. Gonzaga went out, lost at home to Portland State. Like that's a horrendous loss. They've taken some bad losses in their history. Like, don't get me wrong. They've taken bad losses in NCAA tournament settings. The Wichita State loss is an agonizing one that stands out to me. And again, everybody's going to maybe have a bit of a different personal answer to this question in some ways. But losing to Wichita State was my senior year. So that was the last game as a student at Gonzaga that I, followed that team, and they were a 1 seed. It was the first time they'd ever been a 1 seed, and they lost to a 9 seed in the round of 32. They were a 1 seed for the first time in program history and could not make it to the Sweet 16. That is agonizing and heartbreaking. And it felt horrible. But again, like you lost to a team that went to the Final Four. You lost to a team that was undefeated in the regular season the next year, like with a lot of the same players. Like it's not a bad loss in the same way. It's different and more heartbreaking in a lot of ways, but not the same, not as bad as this loss. What this loss, and we'll talk about the NCAA tournament implications in a second. It also opens up the WCC regular season in a major way, makes Gonzaga's upcoming games against Santa Clara and St. Mary's more important than they would have been if they'd had a little bit more of that cushion. Obviously, it's going to plummet Gonzaga in the top, AP poll, which like doesn't matter as much, but is like not good for them from a perception standpoint. Like all these bad things happen. But fundamentally, yeah, I mean, I think this is a quad 3 loss to a team that has not been good, that lost 3 games in a row, that had only 3 wins in the WCC up to this point, had just lost by 30 to Washington State in their most recent game. Like by all accounts, again, from a metrics perspective, from what we know about the, Portland, statistically, everything like that, this loss is pretty darn high on that list, if not at the very top of the list. The 6th ranked team in college basketball from an AP poll. And again, if we're going to use KenPom for Portland, we'll use KenPom for Gonzaga too. The 11th best team in the country, according to KenPom, lost to the 216th team. 205 teams separate these two at KenPom, and Gonzaga lost to them. And again, never led, or barely, 32 seconds, barely led this basketball game. Like, I think that's what's hard to be able to conceptualize this and discuss this, that kind of context of this. Like I, didn't watch with my own eyeballs many of Gonzaga's games in the first, 12 years of the Mark Few era. And then even not all of them after that period of time too. So like seeing the ebbs and flows of the games, some of the losses Gonzaga took, it's going to be harder to answer that question. I remember how agonizing the Santa Clara loss was last year, but again, that was a better team and a worse Gonzaga team. The context is a little bit different. This was a Gonzaga team that only had 1 loss on the year. Statistically and performing, just performance-wise on the year up to this point was one of the best teams in school history, and then got beat by a team that is worse than most of the teams that Gonzaga has ever lost to, ever. Kind of hard to not consider this the worst, if not one of the worst games that in Gonzaga basketball history, certainly regular season history, at least. NCAA tournament perspective, we'll get more into this, a little later, certainly after the Oregon State game. We'll kind of take a look at it next week. Gonzaga's was riding a thin line on potentially even being a 1 seed. That's gone. I mean, there's 0 chance now. And frankly, a 2 seed at this point is improbable. They were already starting to trend towards being a 3 seed. I had a conversation earlier this week of like, well, I think the argument that Gonzaga should be a 2 seed is still there if they win out. They didn't do that. And now they have a quad 3 loss. If they win out from this point forward, it would still require probably multiple other teams really struggling for Gonzaga to be a 2 seed. I think at this point, the most likely outcome for Gonzaga is a 4 seed. And that's assuming they do take care of business. If they lose at St. Mary's, but then win every other game, they win at Santa Clara, they win in the WCC tournament, but they lose at St. Mary's, I think that's probably a 4 seed. 3-loss Gonzaga team, probably going to be a 4 seed like that. It would be surprising. Like Gonzaga's 5 seed team a few years ago had many more losses than 3. So I think that they would still be in that conversation. And I think if they don't lose any more games, if they beat St. Mary's and they win the WCC tournament, all that, I think a 3 seed would be possible. I mean, we'd still be talking about a 2-loss Gonzaga team. Like right now, we're emotional. We're feeling how bad this game was. But if they turn around and win every game, Braden Huff comes back, that's a big part of the equation that we just can't really answer or know anything about. If Huff comes back, plays well, they win their games while he's on the floor, he's healthy going into the tournament, the committee will factor that in and will factor in that they lost this game without him. But again, I think a 2 seed is pretty much out. I think you're looking at somewhere between a 3 seed and a 5 seed, assuming they don't take any more hideous losses like this one. And that includes Saturday's game against Oregon State, which is what we're going to talk about on Friday's episode of Locked On Zags. But that is going to wrap it up for us today here on the show. Thank you so much to those of you who are everyday listeners, regular listeners, to those of you here listening to the show right now. It's no fun to talk about these losses. It's not something we have to do very often, which is a nice thing about covering this team. But then you get games like this sometimes where it just smacks you in the face and you weren't expecting it to happen. We'll have a preview of Oregon State on Friday. I'll be at that game as well. And then we'll get a recap of that game and kind of talk about what all of this means for this team going forward after that. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.